The Allegheny woods were still, except for the gentle rustle of wind threading through the branches, stirring the vibrant, dying leaves. Gold, red, and orange littered the forest floor, crunching softly underfoot as Ryan and I carried the last of the bags into my grandfather's cabin. The air was crisp, 62 degrees, but it felt colder out here, where the trees blocked most of the fading daylight. "This place hasn't changed a bit," Ryan said, tossing his duffel onto one of the old couches. The wooden cabin smelled of dust and pine, the same way it always did, a place where time seemed to stand still. I forced a smile, my chest tightening as I watched him move around the room. Ryan was still as handsome as ever, brown hair messy from the drive, his athletic frame highlighted by the worn hoodie he always wore on these trips. 2 years. 2 years since we graduated, and I still hadn't told him how I felt. "Yeah," I said, "it's like stepping back in time." Ryan turned to me, his blue eyes glinting in the low light. "Hey, are you okay? You've been kinda quiet since we got here." I nodded, quickly looking away. "Just tired, I guess." The truth sat heavy in my chest. I had been quiet, quieter than usual, because I knew what I had to do. I had to tell him, tell all of them, but especially him. The words hovered on the tip of my tongue, so close, but every time I thought about saying them, my heart clenched. What if he didn't feel the same way? This was an impromptu trip we took, as it had been a year since all of us were together. But what if it ended in disaster? The door creaked open behind me, breaking the moment. "Place looks just like I remember it," Jeremy announced, his voice booming as he walked in with Claudia close behind. "Man, I miss this cabin. Feels like a home away from home." Claudia smiled, giving me a small wave as she set her bag down. She was always the calm, quiet one, balancing out Jeremy's jock energy. They'd been dating for about a year now, and as much as I liked them both, seeing them together reminded me of what I didn't have, what I desperately wanted. "Brooklyn and Paige are still outside," Claudia said, brushing a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "They're trying to get Eric to stop messing around with the car. I swear, that guy has no idea what he's doing." Ryan laughed, and the sound of it made my stomach flip. "Yeah, I don't know why we keep letting him drive. He always ends up breaking something." I forced a chuckle, but my mind was far away. The air seemed heavier here, thicker with something I couldn't quite name. I'd been coming to this cabin my whole life, but this time, something felt different. I shook the feeling off, blaming my nerves. This was my moment to finally be honest. I couldn't let my mind play tricks on me. Soon Brooklyn, Paige, and Eric stumbled in, filling the cabin with chatter and laughter. I did my best to blend into the background, pretending to be as carefree as the rest of them. But every time Ryan's eyes flickered over to me, I felt the weight of what I hadn't said yet. Later, as we sat around the living room, eating pizza and reminiscing about old times, I found myself watching Ryan again. His smile, his laugh, the way he effortlessly held everyone's attention. It was hard to believe that 2 years had passed since high school. Back then we were inseparable, but somewhere along the way, things changed. We drifted apart, though not in the usual way. I think I pulled away because being near him hurt too much, knowing I couldn't have what I wanted. Claudia's voice snapped me back to the present. "So Michael, what's the plan for tomorrow? Hiking? Bonfire?" I shrugged, feeling the pressure of their eyes on me. "Yeah, sure, we can do both. Whatever you all want." Ryan caught my eye from across the room, his smile softening. I wanted to say something to him, something real, but I didn't, not yet. As the night dragged on, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Tomorrow, I'd tell them everything, but for now, I'd let them think I was still the same old Michael. I wasn't, and not anymore. The night passed in a blur of laughter and nostalgia, but by morning, I felt more anxious than ever. The weight of what I had to say hung over me like a storm cloud, and every time I looked at Ryan, my chest tightened. I couldn't stop thinking about how today would change everything. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, but I knew better. Nothing about this would be easy. After breakfast, we decided to split up for a while. Claudia and Jeremy wanted to take a walk down to the lake. Brooklyn and Paige wanted to do something for Instagram, and Eric, naturally, had gone off to fix something on his car. I wanted to come up with an excuse to stay behind, but I was restless. I needed air, and I needed to clear my head. "I'll get firewood," I said suddenly, standing up from the table. Ryan glanced at me, eyebrow raised. "You sure? You're looking a little pale. I can go with you." "No, I'm fine," I replied, maybe a little too quickly. I needed space to think. "I'll be right back. The woodshed's just down the driveway." Ryan gave me a skeptical look but shrugged. "All right, but don't take too long. We still have that hike to go on." I smiled weakly, pretending everything was normal, and headed outside. The air was cool, the sun struggling to break through the heavy clouds. It was the perfect fall day, but something felt off. The woods that had always seemed comforting now felt strange, unfamiliar. The towering trees cast long shadows, and the wind carried a faint whisper that I tried to ignore. I followed the narrow path leading down to the old woodshed behind the shack at the edge of the property. It was barely a 5-minute walk, but it felt longer. The farther I went, the more the cabin disappeared behind the trees. The sense of isolation settled in, and I shivered despite the mild temperature. Reaching the shed, I swung the door open with a loud creak and stepped inside. The musty smell of rotting wood hit me immediately, making my stomach churn. I grabbed a few pieces of firewood, stacking them awkwardly in my arms when I heard something, a soft crunching sound like footsteps behind me. I froze, listening. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a little too loud in the stillness. I waited for an answer, but the woods remained silent. My pulse quickened, and I quickly pushed open the shed door, stepping back outside with the firewood in my arms. And then it happened. I tripped. My foot catching on a root or rock, I wasn't sure. The firewood scattered as I hit the ground. My head slammed against something hard, and stars exploded in my vision. Pain radiated from my skull, but worse than that, the world spun as I tried to sit up. I was disoriented, lost for a moment in the dizziness. When I finally managed to get to my feet, everything looked different. The woods seemed darker, the path I'd come from no longer visible through the thick trees. Panic bubbled up in my chest as I realized I had no idea which way the cabin was. I pressed my hand to my throbbing head. The dizziness made it hard to think straight. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but the trees all looked the same. Endless rows of trunks and branches that stretched on forever. So I started in one direction, hoping it was the correct one. But after a few minutes on that, I made the worst move of the day. I turned in another direction, instead of retracing exactly back where I came from when I first was lost. But I didn't even know where exactly I came from. It was crazy. I wasn't even 10 minutes from safety. I shuddered when I realized I didn't want to die out there. That's when I saw him. A figure stepped out from between the trees not far from where I'd fallen. I blinked, my vision still fuzzy, but I could make out the shape of a guy, about my age, tall, and built like someone who spent most of their time outdoors. He had dark hair, messy like he'd been running through the woods, and his clothes were a little ragged, like he'd been out here longer than he should have been. "Hey," I called out, relief flooding through me. "Hey, man, I think I'm lost." The guy's eyes met mine, and for a moment something flickered in them, something I couldn't place. But then he smiled, an easy, confident smile that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I ignored the feeling, chalking it up to my disorientation. "You look like you've been through hell," he said, his voice low and calm. "Need some help?" I nodded, wincing as the pain in my head spiked again. "Yeah, thanks. I hit my head and got turned around. My friends are back at the cabin, but I can't seem to find my way back." The guy walked over, extending a hand to help me up. His grip was strong, steady, and as he pulled me to my feet, I couldn't help but notice how fit he was. Broad shoulders, muscular arms. He looked like someone who belonged out here, someone who thrived in the wilderness. "I'm Jacob," he said, still smiling. "Lucky for you, I know these woods pretty well. Let's get you back to your friends." "Thanks," I said, trying to shake off the weird feeling I had about him. "I'm Michael, by the way." He gave me a sideways glance as we started walking. "So, why haven't your friends come looking for you yet?" The question threw me off. It was a good point. I'd been gone long enough for them to notice by now, especially Ryan. But I shrugged it off, not wanting to dwell on the strangeness of the situation. "They're probably just waiting for me. I wasn't supposed to be gone long." Jacob didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me made me feel uneasy. The woods seemed to close in around us as we walked, the trees pressing in tighter, and the air growing colder. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Then up ahead we saw something. A small figure standing alone in the clearing between the trees. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, staring blankly at us. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of a picture book, and his face was eerily familiar. My stomach dropped. He looked just like Ryan did when we were kids. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The boy stood so still, his eyes locked on me, unblinking, as if he'd been waiting for us. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't possible, he couldn't be real. He looked just like Ryan had when we were kids. The same messy brown hair, the same big curious eyes, and even the same old flannel shirt Ryan used to wear when we went hiking with my grandfather. Jacob stood beside me, watching the boy intently, but there was no surprise in his expression. If anything, he seemed intrigued, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Do you see him?" I asked, my voice shaky. Jacob didn't respond right away. His eyes narrowed and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, I see him." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. The boy hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, but the longer I looked at him, the more I noticed something was wrong. His skin was too pale, almost like porcelain, and his eyes were empty, lifeless, as if there was nothing behind them. "Ryan," I said. I didn't know why I said it. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was the way the boy looked so much like the Ryan I used to know. But as soon as the name left my lips, the boy tilted his head like he'd heard me. And then slowly he started to smile. It wasn't the warm, innocent smile I remembered from childhood. It was twisted, unnatural, like someone who had forgotten how to smile and was forcing their face into the shape. My stomach churned and I took a step back, my pulse quickening. "I think we should go," I said, my voice barely steady. But before we could move, the boy did something that made my blood run cold. He changed. Right before our eyes, the small figure of the boy seemed to ripple, like the air around him was warping. His limbs stretched, his features twisted, and in a matter of seconds, he wasn't a child anymore. He was a man, a grown version of Ryan, but distorted with that same eerie grin plastered on his face. I gasped, stumbling back as my heart slammed against my ribs. The Ryan lookalike didn't say a word. He just stood there, grinning, as if mocking me. His eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, bored into mine, and for a brief moment, I felt like I was looking at something far older, far more sinister than anything I could comprehend. Jacob grabbed my arm, his voice low and urgent. "Michael, don't look back." I could barely hear him over the thundering of my pulse, but something in his tone snapped me out of my trance. My breath came in short gasps, and I tried to pull myself together, but my legs felt like lead. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, my eyes still locked on the twisted version of Ryan. Jacob's grip tightened on my arm. "It's not your friend. Come on, we need to move." But I couldn't move. My feet were frozen in place, rooted to the ground by fear and confusion. The thing that looked like Ryan didn't blink, didn't shift, just stared at me with that unsettling smile. And then, without warning, he began walking backward, slowly, deliberately, until he melted into the shadows of the trees, disappearing as if he had never been there. I stood there trembling, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. It couldn't have been real. It was a trick, a hallucination, maybe from hitting my head. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Something wrong. Jacob tugged at my arm again, this time harder. Michael, we need to go, now. I snapped out of it, nodding shakily. Yeah, let's go. As we started walking again, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching us, that the shadows between the trees were moving in ways they shouldn't. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself was trying to keep us here, pulling us deeper into its grasp. Jacob stayed close by my side, his presence a strange comfort despite the growing unease I felt about him. His earlier calm now seemed calculated, almost too composed. It was like he knew more than he was letting on, but I wasn't in the right state of mind to question it. We trudged through the woods, the sky growing darker as the sun began its slow descent behind the trees. I kept my gaze forward, refusing to glance back even once, terrified of what I might see if I did. The deeper we went into the woods, the more my head throbbed. Every step sent a sharp pain through my skull, and the fading light wasn't helping. The colors of the leaves, once vibrant shades of gold and crimson, now bled into the growing twilight, twisting into shapes that made me second-guess what I was seeing. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, swallowing up the trail ahead of us. I could feel the forest closing in around us. Michael, are you okay? Jacob's voice cut through the fog of my thoughts. His tone was calm, almost too calm, like none of this was getting to him. I'm fine, I lied, wincing as another stab of pain shot through my head. Just need to keep moving. But I wasn't fine, my mind was slipping, and with each passing minute I could feel reality becoming harder to hold on to. I didn't know if it was the blow to my head or the strange things we'd seen, but the world felt wrong. Like I was caught in a dream I couldn't wake up from. Jacob slowed his pace, walking beside me now. I could feel his eyes on me, and it was kind of unsettling. Not because of anything he was doing, but because of that nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something wasn't right with him. Still, I pushed that thought away. I had no choice but to trust him. I needed him to get back to the cabin. Michael! I flinched at the sound of my name, the voice not Jacob's this time, but someone else's. Familiar, too familiar. I turned my head sharply, but Jacob grabbed my wrist before I could look all the way around. Don't, he said, his voice cold. Don't look back. I swallowed hard, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. That voice. I knew it. It was Ryan. Did you hear that? I whispered, my heart hammering against my chest. Jacob didn't answer. His grip on my wrist loosened, but his eyes were fixed straight ahead. Just keep walking, he muttered. Ignore it. I tried, but the voice came again, closer this time, like it was right behind me. Michael, it's me, Ryan. I bit my lip, my stomach twisting. The urge to turn around was overwhelming. It felt like if I didn't look back, I would miss something vital, something important. But Jacob's words echoed in my mind. Don't look back. Michael, the voice repeated, softer now, pleading, now please don't leave me. My breath hitched. It sounded so real, so much like Ryan. I could hear the pain in his voice, the desperation. But I knew better. This wasn't him. It couldn't be him. Ryan was back at the cabin, probably wondering where I was. He wasn't here. Not this version of him, not the thing we'd seen in the clearing. Michael, Jacob said more forcefully now, sensing my hesitation. Keep moving. I nodded, even though my legs felt like they were about to give out beneath me. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, like the forest was trying to drag me back, pull me into whatever twisted game it was playing. And then I saw him. Ryan. He was standing just a few feet ahead in the middle of the path. His familiar grin, the one I'd known for years, spread across his face. But there was something off about it, something I couldn't place. Michael, he said, stepping closer, his voice dripping with an eerie sweetness. Come with me. I stopped in my tracks, my throat went dry, my body locked in place. It was him, Ryan, but not really. This wasn't the Ryan I knew. This wasn't real. Jacob stepped in front of me, his posture tense, like he was ready for a fight. It's not him, he hissed under his breath. Keep walking. Ryan smiled wider, stepping closer. Why are you listening to him, Michael? It's me. Ryan, come on, we can get out of here together. My inner voice screamed at me to move, to follow Jacob's warning. But part of me wanted to believe it was really Ryan, that we could go back to the cabin together, that everything would be fine if I just followed him. I took a step forward, my heart pounding. No! Jacob grabbed my arm, his voice sharp, almost frantic. Don't listen to him. He's not real. Ryan's eyes narrowed, his smile faltering for a split second. Michael, please stay with me. Jacob's grip tightened, pulling me back. Don't trust him. I stood there, frozen, torn between the two. Stop, I whispered, clutching my head. The pain was unbearable now, my thoughts swirling in a fog of confusion. I didn't know what was real anymore. The world around me spun, distorting in ways that made my skin crawl. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, Jacob shoved me back, breaking my trance. Run! Jacob shouted, his voice cutting through the haze. I stumbled backward, my feet moving before my brain could process what was happening. I ran, pushing through the pain, through the fear. Ryan's voice echoed behind me, distorted, desperate, calling my name again and again. But I didn't look back. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, the taste of copper on my tongue from the effort. The forest closed in tighter, the twisted trees looming over us like silent, menacing sentinels. The faint glow of sunset had almost completely vanished, and now only the dark shadows of the woods surrounded us. Jacob stayed ahead of me, glancing back every few steps. His face was hard to read in the fading light, but his posture was rigid, tense. I didn't know how long we had been running, but it was too long. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch made my heart race, thinking I'd hear Ryan's voice again, calling to me, trying to pull me back. But all I could hear now was the heavy thud of our footsteps and my ragged breathing. Jacob slowed down, finally coming to a stop. He turned to me, his chest heaving, and for the first time I saw something different in his expression. Fear. We need to keep moving, I said. My legs trembled beneath me, exhaustion creeping into every muscle. We need to... I know, Jacob interrupted, his eyes darting around. But we can't keep running forever. What are you talking about? I asked, confusion creeping into my voice. We can't stop. We need to get out of here. Jacob's jaw tightened, his gaze locking onto mine. You don't get it, do you? I froze, something in his tone setting off alarm bells in my head. What do you mean? He took a step closer, and for the first time since we met, I felt an edge of unease. You can't outrun it, Michael. You can't outrun him. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. Him? You mean Ryan? He's not real, Jacob. You said that yourself. He's just in my head. Jacob shook his head slowly, his eyes dark, almost unreadable. No, Michael, he's more than that. Jacob's face twisted, his lips pulling into a thin, grim smile. I've been trying to help you this whole time, but you've been too blind to see it. I took a step back, the weight of his words sinking in. What are you talking about? Jacob's hand shot out, grabbing my arm before I could move farther. His grip was cold, unnaturally cold, like ice. I'm the only thing keeping you safe. My heart pounded in my chest, panic rising in my throat. Safe from what? From him, Jacob hissed, his grip tightening. From what's been trying to take you this whole time. Ryan's face flashed in my mind. His soft smile, his kind eyes. The Ryan I knew. Not the twisted version that haunted these woods. Ryan? Jacob's smile faltered, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes, something desperate. He doesn't care about you the way I do, Michael. He never has. I blinked, stunned. What? Jacob stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low whisper. You don't belong with him. You belong with me. My stomach twisted. Jacob. He leaned in, his breath cold against my skin. I've been waiting for you, Michael. All this time, I've been waiting. The words sank into me like a knife, and suddenly I understood. The cracks in Jacob weren't just showing, they were splintering wide open. "You're not real," I said. There was a long pause where everything just froze. Then finally Jacob's face twisted into a sneer, the calm, collected mask he'd worn this whole time cracking apart. "You think you can run from me? From this?" I backed away, the fear coursed through my veins. "I don't know what you are." Jacob's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "I'm the part of you that you've been hiding from your whole life, Michael. The part you're too scared to face." The words struck me like a blow to the chest. My breath hitched, and for a moment, the world around me spun. Everything felt wrong, twisted, like I was standing on the edge of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Ryan's voice echoed in the distance, faint but unmistakable. "Michael?" I whipped around, scanning the trees. There, in the shadows, I saw Ryan, standing at the edge of the darkness, his figure barely visible. But he wasn't smiling this time. His face was blank, his eyes hollow. "Michael, stay with me," Ryan called, his voice calm but cold. "It's safe with me." Jacob's hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me back toward him. His face was inches from mine now, his breath cold and sharp. "Don't listen to him, Michael. He's lying." I stared at Jacob, my mind reeling. "Why should I believe you?" Jacob's grip tightened, his expression frantic. "Because I'm the only one who knows what you really need. He'll never love you, Michael. Not the way I do." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The words cut deep, twisting the confusion and fear inside me. For so long, I had carried the weight of my feelings for Ryan, feelings I had never spoken aloud, never acted on. But now, standing here, trapped between these two forces, I didn't know what to believe. Ryan stepped closer, his voice soft but insistent. "Michael, come on, let's go home." Jacob's voice rose in desperation. "Don't look back, Michael. If you look back, it'll be over." My mind raced, torn between the two, my body trembling with the weight of the decision. I closed my eyes, my breath shaky, and in that moment, I made my choice. Slowly I turned, and when I did, I saw him. Ryan, no longer distant, no longer calling from the shadows. He was right behind me, his eyes light and full of meaning, a soft smile barely on his lips. Behind me, Jacob's voice shattered into a scream. I turned around, but it was too late. As I watched, Jacob's form flickered and twisted, his body contorting as it melted away into the darkness. I blinked, my vision blurred and my mind hazy. My head ached, pulsing, throbbing, as if my skull were a drum, beaten by the relentless rhythm of something far too dark to understand. I was cold, too cold, the kind of cold that made your bones feel brittle, as if they might shatter with a wrong move. And yet there was warmth, a pressure against my side, a soft weight, like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. I tried to lift my head, but my body refused to cooperate, sluggish and unresponsive. My eyes flickered open, revealing pale, artificial light and the sterile whiteness of a hospital room. The faint sound of beeping filled the air, a rhythmic reminder that I was still alive. My throat was dry and my lips cracked as I tried to speak. A dull pain spread through my head, but beneath it there was something else pressing against my chest, something I couldn't place. I tried to focus, but my vision remained fuzzy, and then I saw him. Ryan. He was sitting in a chair beside me, his eyes wide but soft, filled with something I hadn't expected, concern. He whispered my name like the rustle of autumn leaves. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. "You're awake." I blinked, my vision clearing just enough to make out his features. His usual easygoing smile was gone, replaced by something deeper, more intense. Something that made my heart ache, made the air between us feel thick and heavy. I don't understand," I managed to croak. My voice sounded alien to me, weak and strained. What? What happened? Ryan's expression faltered. He looked down at his hand resting on the edge of the bed and then back at me. His voice was quieter, almost hesitant. You hit your head. You were out for a while. I swallowed, my throat burning. The memory of the woods, of Jacob, of the thing in the dark, it all came rushing back. The way I'd turned around and seen Ryan's twisted form, the way Jacob had melted away into the night. It felt like a nightmare. I had to make sense of it. I struggled to sit up, the dizziness threatening to pull me under again. Ryan stood up, his hand gently pressing against my shoulder to keep me steady. Easy, he said. His warm touch grounded me, but my mind was spinning. Jacob, where's Jacob? I asked, panic lacing my voice. Ryan's expression shifted, his brows furrowing in confusion. Jacob? I don't know who that is. You were alone. It's just been the paramedics, Brooklyn and Eric. They found you, remember? I stared at him, unblinking. My breath quickened, the reality of the situation slamming into me like a wave. But I saw him. I saw him with you. He was here. He was real. Ryan's eyes were soft but firm, his hand still on my shoulder. Michael, you were out there alone for hours before we could find you. His voice choked up. I blinked again, the haze lifting, but the confusion remained. No, I whispered, my throat tight. No, Ryan, he was there with me. He was trying to keep me safe. He said you didn't care about me. Ryan's eyes widened, but it passed quickly, replaced by a gentle, almost sad look. I care about you more than you know, he said. He squeezed my shoulder gently, and I looked up into his eyes. There was something there, something deeper than friendship, something that I'd never dared to let myself believe. I felt it now, clearer than ever. Ryan, I said, my voice soft, I need to tell you something. He tilted his head, his gaze never leaving mine. What is it? I could feel my pulse in my throat, the fear and the weight of everything I'd held back for so long bubbling to the surface. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening. I've been in love with you. Ryan blinked, the surprise in his eyes giving way to something else, something more vulnerable, more exposed. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his gaze. And then just as quickly, he smiled. I know, he said, his voice gentle. I think I've always known. His hand moved from my shoulder, his fingers gently brushing against my cheek. His touch was so warm, so real, that it made my heart lurch with an overwhelming mix of emotions: relief, fear, hope. You don't have to be afraid anymore, he whispered. You don't have to keep hiding. And then, without hesitation, Ryan leaned down and kissed me on the forehead, soft, almost reverent. The kiss lingered, a promise and a balm to the wounds I'd carried for so long. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something. A vase of flowers resting on a small table near the door. The card was simple, plain, with no name on it, just flowers. I felt my heart skip a beat as I glanced back at Ryan, whose face was still soft and warm. He was still there, his hand still holding mine, his eyes filled with concern. But then something caught my eye. On the other side of the room, standing near the vase, was a figure, just out of focus, too blurry to make out. But I knew, he was a part of me. Something that escaped and became its own thing. And he wasn't the only one who wanted out.